Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to provide a few comments regarding space. And I'm reminded of Calvin and Hobbes. Anyone ever read Calvin and Hobbes? Okay, we're aging ourselves. I noticed the 3 PLC students over there keeping their hands down. They were probably reading science books anyway at that time. But some of us read Calvin and Hobbes. And there's one of the comic strips, and in this particular one, you see them staring up in space together. And they're in a big field, and they're deep, deep in thought. And Calvin finally breaks the silence and says, "Sometimes I think the surest sign that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe is simply that none of it has ever tried to contact us." We're good at that. Now, I want to make sure we're all inclusive at the Opportunity Coalition. So if any of you feel like you've been visited by alien life forms, feel free to talk to our distinguished speaker at the end. I know he has a few hours to spend with you and walk you through that. So tonight we have the unique opportunity to hear from a champion of Colorado's aerospace and defense industry, retired Major General J. Lindell. His talk is especially fitting to our goals here at the Opportunity Coalition when we recognize the enormously positive impact this particular industry has on Colorado's economy, technology innovation, and our very education. My company, North Star Commercial Partners, had the opportunity to underwrite the ULA launch, and so we paid for a bunch of food and everything, and we went down there. And I was just amazed at the opportunity to go down to Florida and see how many Colorado companies are impacted by these industries in our state. We've got some really cool things going on here. Colorado's aerospace industry ranks second in the nation for private sector aerospace employment, totaling an average of 25,000 people per year. With over 300 million in total exports annually, international communities and allies around the globe rely on our state's products, services, and technology. Colorado is also actively cultivating innovation and commercial space opportunities, developing Spaceport Colorado and pursuing federal designation as a test site for unmanned aerial vehicles. In speaking with Jay just before this event, I learned some really cool things. Centennial, the town that we're in right now. Did you know that Centennial employs more rocket scientists? Now, these are real rocket scientists. It's not like, hey, you're a rocket scientist. Like, they're a rocket scientist. More rocket scientists than any other community, not only in Colorado, but the country, but the world. We have 1,200 rocket scientists in Centennial alone. Yeah. Now, I know when sometimes you might go to a fast food restaurant, you might not be encountering one of those at the order counter, but there are rocket scientists out there, real ones. I also learned that my alma mater, CU, receives more funding from NASA than any other college institution in the country. That's pretty neat. And that bodes well for you three. I'm just going to keep going back to you three all night. I was just so impressed. More than 400 consulting, engineering, manufacturing, and supplier companies provide space-related products and services in Colorado. In the past few years, NASA awarded contracts totaling more than $1.5 billion to Colorado aerospace companies, earning the state a 4th place ranking nationally. 69 Colorado companies have won technology and development commercialization grants since 2001 via NASA's Small Business Innovation Research or Small Business Technology Transfer Program. And a further 193 companies have won similar grants to develop technologies for the Department of Defense. Colorado is at the center of global innovation in aerospace and the space industry, hosting the National Space Symposium annually in Colorado Springs. As we learn and engage more this evening on these subjects, may we be inspired to pursue ideas and actions together that is expansive and miraculous of the space itself. So, with regards to our speaker, Again, here at the Opportunity Coalition, we try to have diverse speakers, people that we can learn from and take away golden nuggets. And tonight, I think you're going to be very impressed with our speaker, assuming that our technology works and all those other wonderful things. With over 33 years of experience in aerospace operations, encompassing a host of impressive titles and achievements, Major General Lindell currently serves as the Colorado Aerospace and Defense Industry Champion, working in the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. There he provides oversight for the implementation of our state's aerospace strategic plan, establishes and maintains positive relationships with the state government officials, legislators, and constituents, and assists with legislation and proposals to help advance the aerospace and defense industry in the state of Colorado. Previously, one of the many positions that he held was that of Capability Director for the Pentagon's Air Force Global Power Acquisition Programs. By the way, I've already asked him about Area 51, so you all don't need to ask him that question. I know the answer now. Can't tell you. He told me. In which he was responsible for directing, planning, and programming for 170 Air Force Joint Service and International programs with a $10 billion annual budget. The retired Major General entered the Air Force in 1978. Thank you again for your service to our country. Following graduation from the U.S. Air Force Academy, and attended undergraduate pilot training at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. As a command pilot, he logged more than 4,000 flying hours, primarily in the F-11 and F-16 aircrafts. Other operational and staff assignments that he has held include commanding the 35th Fighter Squadron in South Korea and the 27th Operations Group in New Mexico. In addition, he served as Deputy Commanding General in the Combined Air Power Transition Force, Combined Security Transition Command in Afghanistan, and his combat experience includes Operation El Dorado Canyon in 1986 and Operation Desert Storm in 1991. In sum, we have a true patriot among us, somebody who's seen a lot and done a lot. Help welcome to the front. Come on up.
I can keep going if you want. Brian, no, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, thanks again. Warm introduction, and my pleasure to be here this evening. And it's always fun for me to get out and talk about aerospace in Colorado because it is such a dynamic, thriving industry sector. It bleeds across all advanced industry sectors of our economy. Telecommunications, electronics, information technology, a lot of aerospace is just software development in Colorado, big data analytics. All those algorithms, they have to be developed, they have to be coded, they have to be part of software to turn data into real information. So we have this thriving space economy that's really pulling hard on technology development, really driving Colorado's economy in multiple sectors here. And so it led to creation of this job that I'm in. And it really resulted out of a study by the Brookings Institution that the governor started. And one of the recommendations was to appoint and have a aerospace industry champion to help be a focal point for this thriving industry sector in Colorado. So one thing led to another. At the time, I had retired. I was consulting, big business consulting. I was living in Colorado Springs, spending way too much time on trips back to Washington, too much time working out of my car, too much time working out of airport terminals. I could still open a lot of doors in the Pentagon for defense business. I go, this is just way busier than I want to be in a retired life. And my wife was taking a job here in Denver area, so we were making the move from Colorado Springs. So I started looking around the Denver area, and I go, and I see this job advertised with the state government, Aerospace and Defense Industry Champion. I go, wow, I'm an aerospace and defense industry consultant. I think this champion thing must be a promotion. And so one thing led to another, and I've been in the job. It'll be 2 years next week in the job. And I'm having a lot of fun. It's It's a beautiful state. We're growing. Aerospace is growing at 7.4% this year. And it's just a pleasure to help in any way I can to create jobs for Colorado, promote innovation, promote technology, promote aerospace, and I get to go to launches. and I'll talk about a launch I was recently at. We won't worry about the slides coming up, so Kyle, if you're still working on them, don't worry about them. I can talk without them, so no issue. Hey, what's a champion really do? What's a champion? Sometimes I'm introduced as, they forget the title and call me the space czar, or the person in charge of this. Well, really, in economic development, I'm an ecosystem catalyst. And so if you look at a thriving economic system, aerospace, just like any of our advanced industries, you put the business sector, the sector that creates jobs, produces end items, produces tax revenues at the center, and all that has to be supported by government. Federal, state, local, municipal governments have to have policy that builds a business climate, that eliminates barriers. So as a champion, I work with our federal government. I work with our congressional delegation. I hold forums with all the staff members understanding what are the issues that need to be changed or policy enacted to help grow this thriving sector, because we are heavily government funded, federal government funded in aerospace in Colorado. And then I work with the state legislature. We have an aerospace and defense caucus, and I work with our state legislators. Most of it is just plain education and information and how big this economic sector is and how important it is to our economy. I also talk a lot about unmanned air systems with our legislature. It seems to be a big or a bubbling issue right now, especially on social issues with unmanned air systems or drones. I'm starting to say drones more often than I am on unmanned air systems, and it's okay to say drones, but especially when it comes to areas of privacy. And so and last year there was an issue, a bill proposed, and I was against the language in the bill. The governor's office actually gave me permission to go testify against the bill in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So I do things like that also in my job. Now, so there'll be some other bubbling issues here on, I think, on UAS and drones and privacy issues. Other areas I get involved with are trade associations. Colorado Space Coalition, which is run out of the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation. So I work hand in hand with the Space Coalition as a catalyst to promote the industry sector. Colorado Space Business Roundtable, promoting generally small business development in Colorado. And the Unmanned Air Systems Colorado is another trade association I work closely with. And then additionally, I have a title or a duty to help promote positive relations with the defense and military in Colorado. So I work with the Aurora Defense Council in working on any issues with Buckley Air Force Base, and with Colorado Springs. I'm probably in Colorado Springs at least one day a week. I work with the Military Affairs Council in Colorado Springs, as well as the Regional Business Alliance on any defense issues and defense industry development. Investors. I also do a lot of connecting businesses with investors. Sometimes investors will get a hold of me and look for businesses they are looking to invest in. And so I connect and I make recommendations. And small business, today, a group of businesses, these are unmanned air systems, we're looking for investment, what kind of investors and so forth. So I'm able to provide them that information on investors and what's available in Colorado to help them out. And so a lot of that. And then another job I really do as a catalyst is just plain public outreach, a lot of forums like this. And so I enjoy getting out, talking to the public, talking to whoever about aerospace in Colorado, why it's important to our economy, and where we're going. And I'll tell you about one event I recently did. It was probably the biggest thrill I've had in this job. Last spring I got invited to go out to Ovid, Colorado. I'm going, where's Ovid? Never heard of it. Well, it's 10 miles from the Nebraska border, way out there in the northeast corner of Colorado, very rural agricultural area. And the county economic development person who I was speaking at a conference said, hey, would you like to come out to the high school and talk about aerospace? I said, sure. Well, the day lined up to be about mid-October, October 14th. And so we set it all up. I thought I was coming out to talk to about 20 to 30 high school students about aerospace. Well, then it was going to be the entire school, grades 7 through 12. So I got 12-year-olds. How do you keep their attention for more than 5 minutes? And how do you keep 18-year-olds off their cell phones? So I'm trying to figure this out. And then, so I'm coming up with some engaged learning groups. And then the school superintendent goes, whoa, wow, this looks good. We're going to bring the whole school district in. So 12 high schools. And so this became a big event. So I went across my network, and I run a key industry network across the network of aerospace leaders. And I said, help! And I had 57 people, count me in, whatever you need. So what we ended up with was engaged learning teams on space astronaut and Mars, unmanned air systems. We talked about STEM and life skills and planning careers. 3D printing was also in one of those groups. Aviation, you can fly. I had I had a 5-time shuttle, Joe Voss from CU, come out, 5-time shuttle astronaut come out. I had Amelia Earhart come out, flew around the world last year. I had Willie Daniels, who's a United Airlines flight captain, 37 years, flies all over the world, come out. And I had the lieutenant governor. They invited him out, and he's coming out, and I go, well, he's not going to make it. He's not going to drive 3 hours out there to do it. So I got the guard to fly him out in a helicopter. So he came out, and it landed on the football field, and as soon as he lands with a helicopter on the football field, of course, with this local community, they mob the aircraft, and he gets out like a rock star. You know, hey, I'm here. And so the helicopter now becomes a static display. And we had the Challenger Learning Center out doing e-missions to Mars with kids who had to figure out technical and social problems en route to the spaceship to Mars and solve them. And they had 2 engaged learning groups doing that. And so this whole day, at the end of it, you know, wears you out, but there's a sense of reward. That when I interviewed 4 students at the end of the day, they all wanted to be either pilots or astronauts and rocket scientists and engineers and all this stuff. Oh, by the way, we flew 21 of them in an aircraft. I'm on the board over Wings of the Rockies, and we have a teacher flight orientation program. So we're able to use how we're covered under the liability for students, and so the school accepted a waiver and so forth. So we flew 21 students, some for the first time in their lives that they ever flown on an aircraft. And so at the end of it, the end of the day, when the school superintendent says, my 8-year-old granddaughter now wants to be a rocket scientist. So it gives you a sense of gratification and thrill. So I'll tell you, all over the state, all over business, academia, institutions, research, but this has been the most fun event going out to this high school, and just a pleasure to do this in Colorado. Now I can't keep up with, by the way, all the other STEM requests to come out and be at schools and judges and so forth, but it's a lot of fun and a lot of reward. Okay, how are we doing in Colorado? I want to talk a little bit about Colorado, how we're doing economically, and where aerospace fits in this. We're doing very well. Through last year, the end of 2014, we're the 5th fastest growing state in the nation. We're actually 3rd fastest through the 3rd quarter of last year. Energy sector started to take a slump. We got heavy energy development in northwest Colorado, out to the west, and north and east. And so the energy sector took us down number 5 overall, where we were ranked number 3. So overall, doing well. Our unemployment is the lowest it's been since, let me look at my chart here, since even 2006. So when you look at 9 years, we're approaching 4% in Colorado. And economists say, well, you just don't get lower than 4%. You're always going to have, at a bottom, about a 4% unemployment rate. But the thing about it is, when we start looking at the data, is in 2014, our unemployment rate came faster, much faster than the national average. We accelerated our economy much faster than where the rest of the nation was pulling out of a recession. At the height of the recession, we'll call 2008 through 2010, our unemployment rate was approaching about 9%. The nation was up at 10%. So we're down near 4% today. Economic growth through last year was 5.8%. Growing economy with the area, the greater Denver area, Fort Collins, Loveland, leading economic growth. Across the Front Range in general, leading economic growth. The lowest areas in economic growth at 3.3%, Grand Junction, Pueblo, Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs. I spend a lot of time up and down the Front Range, and especially figuring out Colorado Springs. But here's what's going on to the south. A heavy defense-oriented economy, 44% GDP directly impacted by defense spending. And a lot of that defense spending in Colorado Springs are service, supply, support contracts, not the big dollar procurement contracts, not the billion-dollar satellites manufactured here in Waterton Canyon by Lockheed Martin. These are more maintenance and supply, operation maintenance budgeted contracts in Colorado Springs. So when defense takes a 20% cut in O&M funding, businesses that had 200 people are going to take a 20% cut, and 40 people are going to be laid off at 20%. That's just the nature of this business. So, excuse me, we see Colorado Springs relatively flat, but now on an uphill climb, growing, but growing slower than still Pueblo to the south, but still showing some positive growth. And so I've been working heavy in Colorado Springs on where we can develop Colorado Springs, bring business to Colorado Springs in the aerospace sector. Mayor Suthers has a vision of Cyber City of America. And so working on a task force with the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs on how we can help develop this Cyber City of America, meet the mayor's vision. Here's something on our population growth. We are double the national average in Colorado. Our population growth is 1.8%, the national average, roughly 0.9%, and we're projected to continue growing faster than the national average. In 2014, our population growth was significantly high. We're going to be in fact, by the end of this year, we'll be 5.5 million people in the state. In 2014, 60% of our population growth came from out of the state. So if you're a native Coloradan, you're kind of rare here overall, but even more rare with our growth in population. Now, significant is, of that 60% from out of state, majority of those people were aged 25 to 39. Millennials. Millennials that are tech savvy. Millennials that think about work and what work is all about. Different than maybe my generation looks at work. And they're kind of an outdoorsy group too. Attracted by the mountains and the outdoors and those sort of things. And sometimes, besides craft beers and lattes, work is life. And my social blends into work. So it's this sort of millennial generation that we got to think about the people we're hiring, what are their needs, especially here in Colorado when we have such a big part of our population that's growing with this millennial generation. Tech savvy, by the way. And students, you can put your cell phones away back there. You know, you don't have to be on them. Okay, got it. But this millennial generation, instant news, instant information. So we got to capture that and figure out how they blend into this workforce. Okay, aerospace in Colorado. Brian, you did a good job talking about it. Let me highlight a few other things here about aerospace. Number one in the nation per capita. Now, California has more aerospace. In fact, California has double the amount of aerospace employees than Colorado. However, they got 4 times the population too. So when you're only double, when you start looking at our state, we're number 1 in per capita per population when you start looking at the aerospace employees here in our state. 84% of our businesses, oh, by the way, over 400, I think it was 426 our office figured out that we have our registered aerospace companies in Colorado. Now, 84% of those companies are small business. Small business as defined, less than 500 employees. However, what is more important to understand is 55% of all those businesses are 10 employees or less in this sector. And the hub of a lot of small business in aerospace is the Boulder Triangle. And I'll say between Westminster, Boulder, Golden, and back, you've got amazing small businesses doing wow stuff. And I walk into businesses, and they've got clean rooms. They've got precision measuring equipment. They've got calibrated equipment, and they're doing advanced technology stuff that, wow, I had no idea. I walked into a business just, it was earlier this week, micro feed horns, this big, going into CubeSat technology. And it's this rapidly developing technology right here in Colorado, right here in that Boulder Triangle. It's a real gem of capability, but it's fueling our aerospace sector, and it's also fueling other technology development across electronics and telecommunications and so forth. And I'll say, although I don't have the data to back this up, so, and I haven't, and no economist has been able to figure this out for me, but half of aerospace in Colorado is just software development. Software for flight controls, for satellite systems, ground control systems, the big data analytics, validation, simulation software, just software that turns all that sensor data that comes off of satellites into real understandable information. So that's a big part of what gets done here in Colorado. Our growth has been, over the past 10 years, approaching 18% in the aerospace sector, where the rest of the nation is a 6% growth. So you can see we've accelerated more, and I attribute that, and I'll tell you, a real catalyst for innovation, technology development in the aerospace industry is CU Boulder. CU has a nationally acclaimed aerospace engineering program. Great to see the students out here tonight. And it's such a catalyst for technology development and business startup. And let me give you an example. I was walking through the engineering center, and a group of students were working on a CubeSat, shoebox size satellite. And they're working on it, and who I thought was a professor overseeing their work is working through, and he's telling me all about it and so forth, what they're doing. Well, this was a business leader. It wasn't a professor. This was a business leader helping teach. Oh, by the way, I got a PhD from CU Engineering, was back helping teach, but also taking a lot of knowledge back to his business. Now, this is a program funded by NASA under the Space Grant Consortium, and helping develop this technology and helping teach and train. Oh, by the way, taking back to his business a lot of knowledge that he can apply directly to his business. Not CU funded, but NASA funded. NASA is very open to transfer of technology and knowledge to help grow business. And so there they are. So you see this business collaboration just growing right there. Oh, by the way, you can see it in multiple engineering departments at CU. So you look at this university, at the core of this innovation triangle is a university. And if you look at other places in our nation, whether it be a Silicon Valley or the North Carolina triangle, you see at the core of it a university system spurring technology growth and innovation and a lot of business startups. And right here in Colorado happens to be our flagship university, University of Colorado up in Boulder. Spent time in Boulder today working with the Vice Chancellor on a program on how we better collaborate with our federal labs and develop this space sector. So Couldn't be more proud of CU. By the way, I work with many other universities, not just CU. I work with Metro State on developing their engineering sciences program and Advanced Manufacturing Institute. Did some strategic planning with Metro State as they try to transition out of kind of a old nighttime school college to a full-up, meet this workforce of the future needs. And they really got it going, and Dr. Jordan there is really leading Metro State into the future they need to be. And I also work with the University of Colorado and Colorado Springs on this cyber task force and helping Colorado Springs become or the university, UCCS, become a catalyst for business development in Colorado Springs. Here's an issue, though. We're still heavily government funded in aerospace in Colorado. NASA, Department of Defense, NRO, NGA, you can go all through all three-letter acronyms, agencies. And so we are heavily anchored on government programs, government funding. The roots of aerospace in Colorado is Department of Defense post-World War II, development of the ICBM system out in Waterton Canyon with the old Martin facility out there, Martin Marietta, and then became Lockheed Martin. But that's the roots of really what started here. In the CU, by the way, developing way early on, post-World War II, a high-altitude testing program, atmospheric testing, which later led into the aerospace development program. So that's really has been the roots. We still are heavily government funded. CU, by the way, which was mentioned, #1 in the nation in NASA grant funding, more than any other public institution. Now, why is that? Well, as a state, we don't fund higher education very well. So that's one reason. Two is they've really got a world-class engineering, aerospace engineering program, and they have to be more aggressive at grant funding for research because state dollars are not there as maybe some other states provide their university system. Let me talk about our business climate. We have, and I meet with a lot of businesses. Oh, by the way, California does a good job of selling Colorado. And I meet with businesses from California that are looking to relocate, expand, and grow operations in Colorado. And it's not just aerospace, it's a lot of software type companies. And so our business climate is very attractive. They look at corporate tax rates, they look at labor rates, they look at utility rates, and it all adds up into very positive. We have a government, state legislature. Our governor is very pro-business and policies. We have a very educated and talented workforce. 36% of our workforce has college degrees. They look at our university system to support continuing education. And that's a big factor in business attractiveness. They look at a dynamic innovation system. I talked about the Boulder Triangle, if you will. But we have 30 federal labs in Colorado. 30 federal labs. Not too many people know that. A lot located in the Boulder area. But that adds $2.3 billion of economic output, 8,000 jobs for Colorado due to federal labs in Colorado. But what that also does, it attracts talent. It's also a catalyst through federal grant funding and small business innovative research grants into a lot of innovation technology grants. It helps build this economic cluster, this industry cluster, this R&D cluster that's so important for that technology to be developed and then transferred to business. And I'll tell you the other thing that still adds up of why businesses come to Colorado is our mountains still sell. And especially to this population growth I was talking about, those mountains are attractive. And it's a lifestyle, it's an outdoorsy lifestyle. They're still there, and I've met with some recent businesses that were looking, in fact, a business closed down operations in another state, and they've consolidated, expanded operations in Colorado. It happened to be a defense industry business. But I asked, why Colorado? And it goes, well, we could get our people to move to Colorado. We couldn't get them to move to this East Coast location. We could get them to, the people we wanted to keep, we could get them to move to Colorado. So this lifestyle that Colorado has is still attractive to business growth. A big part also of our economy I need to mention is defense. Recently, the state had funded last year a study on the defense infrastructure or defense economy. It was run through the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. The end result was the governor released the study the end of May this past year. It was a $27 billion economic factor due to defense in Colorado. And that has to include not only the payroll salary from our defense installations, which includes active duty and civilian personnel, was $7 billion. 5 major installations here in Colorado. And so payroll alone was $7 billion, but when you look at all the other defense funding and procurement, those dollars add up. Right here in Centennial, United Launch Alliance has been the sole DoD, Department of Defense provider for launch capability. And those launches aren't inexpensive. When you talk about a couple $100 million launch, they add up. When you talk about a GPS satellite that may be $800 million, they add up. So when you really look at defense, Colorado Springs is a heavy defense economy. When you really look at the big dollars in Colorado, it's actually a lot of it right here in the greater Denver area due to the defense companies. And I'll tell you, the Lockheeds and the Boeings and the Raytheons and Northrop Grumman's, Ball Aerospace, Sierra Nevada, all have defense contracts. Global Positioning System, GPS. I want to highlight a few programs, and we'll move on to some questions here. GPS. Colorado's the epicenter for the world of GPS. Let me back up. 39 satellites today in orbit in the GPS constellation. 19 of those are manufactured in Colorado. All of them were launched by United Launch Alliance, headquartered right here in Colorado. Every single one of them. And every satellite is controlled at Schriever Air Force Base, right outside of Colorado Springs. And the U.S. government provides GPS free to the world. Clinton administration in 1995 said, this isn't just going to be DoD only. We're going to open it up and provide it free to the world. I can remember flying at the time, and I'm going, and I used to hack a watch, time, distance, heading, and then an inertial system that kind of drifted every so often. When we started flying with GPS, especially in a fighter when you're the only, you don't have, it's you navigating, doing everything. You're going, wow, why are we providing this capability free to the world? But what tremendous foresight. Any economist can say what the U.S. has gained by providing this capability is immeasurable to the economic impact that we have gained out of GPS. It's embedded throughout all our lives and what we do. It synchronizes the global information system. The timing signal that's accurate to a billionth of a second, atomic clock accuracy, provided by the GPS system, synchronizes our information system to enable all financial transactions. If you go to an ATM and get money out of an ATM, that synchronization signal provided by GPS system to enable that financial transaction. If that signal lapsed for more than 5 or 6 hours, the scientists have told me Wall Street would crash if it wasn't synchronized to enable these financial transactions. And even tonight, I had my GPS on my phone. Even though I kind of knew where this facility was, I wasn't quite sure. It told me exactly where it was, right here navigating. And so when I was on a recent visit I was in the GPS control center at Schriever, and I'm expecting the DV brief, and there's 2 captains sitting at the console, big screen, watching 24 operational GPS satellites, 6 in the reserve, others orbiting as spares in the system. So I'm expecting the brief, and the captain turns around and just tells me, well, sir, we control humanity. I go, whoa, pretty bold statement, Captain. And he goes, well, first there was fire, then the wheel, and now GPS. And so I started thinking about it. Okay. It was later explained to me that there's 3 billion devices receiving a GPS signal at any one time in the world. That's 7 billion people in the world and 3 billion devices. Started thinking about it. Well, on me, I've got 2 cell phones, each receiving a signal. My watch tells me it has a GPS signal. You know, just on me, I have 3 signals I'm receiving. So I guess, wow, okay, I can believe that. 3 billion devices receiving this GPS signal. Okay, we control humanity. Right here in Colorado. I agree. So, yeah, it's phenomenal capability. Another system, the Orion. It's our next big leap into space. Developed right here by Lockheed Martin. The Orion space capsule had its first test launch nearly a year ago. It's only a 4-hour flight, but successful. But it's enabling our capability to get human certified space vehicles back into not only orbit, but back into deep space exploration. Stepping stone to someday, if our nation sets it as a goal, to get to Mars. And that Orion space capsule developed right here in Colorado, Lockheed Martin, 120 subcontractors on the program right here in Colorado. The test launch was launched by United Launch Alliance on a Delta IV Heavy rocket, 2 million pounds of thrust, and I got to go to the launch. And talk to many media, do many media interviews talking about aerospace in Colorado and how we are at the epicenter of human-rated space vehicles getting us back into space. Now, people say, well, we're in space. We're in an International Space Station. We got people going there all the time. But we pay the Russian government $76 million an astronaut to get us to the International Space Station because we don't have the capability as a nation to fly our own astronauts to the space station. Now, we're developing that capability in a separate program, but we don't have that capability today. So what happened here? Maybe we weren't so aerospace-minded. Of course, we'd canceled a program that was going to fill that gap from the space shuttle to where we are today, but we don't have that capability, and we need to get back on that capability. One other program I'm going to highlight, I'll just highlight the United Launch Alliance. 2006, formed between Lockheed and Boeing, joint venture. Right here, headquartered in Centennial, 100 consecutive successful launches into orbit. On 2 October with a Mexican government satellite. Now the significance of that, they're heavy Department of Defense provider, U.S. government provider and launch capability. But this was another government, a commercial launch with a telecommunications satellite for the Mexican government. Now, this was Morelos 2 satellite. Morelos 1 was unsuccessfully launched by the Russians. Didn't make it into orbit. So it went back to the U.S. government, and ULA put it into orbit years later here on a Morelos 2 satellite. Governor did a proclamation. He called it ULA Day in Colorado for this 100 successful consecutive launch. And I couldn't be more proud in supporting United Launch Alliance. Oh, by the way, I was at the Capitol earlier today with the United Launch Alliance made an announcement and it was a media event with the governor and so forth there, that they are now starting in year 2017. I was talking about CubeSat technology, shoebox-sized satellites, that they are going to be on their available space on launches because there's a lot of excess space. When you launch a satellite into orbit, a single payload, there's excess space. And you can they're going to launch up to 25 CubeSats with the excess space there, free to researchers and universities with preference to Colorado University. And in fact, Chancellor was sitting in the front row seat, and Tori Bruno, CEO at ULA, points at him and says, and CU is going to be the #1 first dibs in our launches and their CubeSat technology they're developing. So couldn't be more proud of what ULA is doing to promote our business environment. I think I just want to talk about emerging trends, and then I'll get on to questions here. But where is the aerospace sector growing? Mentioned we're growing at 7.4% this year. It's a growing, thriving economic sector, creating jobs and creating good paying jobs. Average salaried employee in Colorado, the average salary is roughly $53,000 of an employee in Colorado. Aerospace, that average is $115,000. And so there's a lot of induced jobs that come out of an aerospace worker in Colorado. And for roughly, I'll say an economist to tell you, for every $50,000 salary, there's another service job that's created in our state. So it's an economic sector that creates jobs. Not only innovation technology that bleeds across many sectors, but it's helping create jobs. It's a high-paying wage sector. The unmanned air systems is an emerging industry in Colorado. And all those microelectronics and sensors, software that went into space systems, all that applies to unmanned air systems. So we've got an emerging industry with all the elements here to really promote this drone industry for Colorado. And what's the economic benefits? I have no idea, but I do know that once the FAA comes out with a policy that enables safe integration into our national airspace system, that this industry will grab this technology and figure out how to use it and make tremendous efficiencies and productivity across many sectors, and especially emergency management services that are going to save lives. Search and rescue, floods, fires, you name it, but there'll be a lot of applicability here in the unmanned air systems. Advanced manufacturing, 3D printing, aerospace industry is pulling hard on this technology and demanding faster, better, cheaper, more. When you look at the advanced alloys in the aerospace sector, and especially the complex components, it lends itself to additive, this advanced process of manufacturing. You got a tech-savvy economy. We're just ready to grow this advanced manufacturing capability and be a leader in the nation. I keep talking about it and encouraging, and we got grants towards from our state, from our office, on helping develop this technology for Colorado. Cyber. Cyber is a growing industry. Oh, by the way, I got my letter from the Office of Personnel Management, said all my personal identity and records and everything I submitted for my security clearance and so forth, it's been compromised, and probably in China, and who knows what they're doing with it. So, and that was 21.5 million Americans affected by this cyber incident, just on this alone. This business is growing, roughly a $70 billion market today. In the next few years, it's planning to be about a $170 billion industry market. And we have, as I was talking about, aerospace is such a tech-savvy, software-oriented economy. We have a lot of elements, a lot of talent, a lot of capability right here in Colorado to advance cyber business development and cyber growth. And I'm working hard and seeing all these elements in Colorado Springs, so maybe we can help develop a cyber-oriented business economy in Colorado Springs. Okay, last point. As well as we're doing, we got a big problem. Our economy's growing. You look at the unemployment low, you look at population growth, but we have a problem, and I hear about it from business all the time. It's a workforce development skills gap. And we're not talking about the advanced degrees or four-year degrees coming out of CU or School of Mines. In fact, business will tell me we find gems of engineering talent right here in Colorado, School of Mines, CSU, CU. We're doing well. But we can't find the technicians to, even on a fabrication machine, a CNC-type machine, who has to have talent to be able to code machines, take draft specifications, code this machine, and fabricate a tool or fabricate an end item. To take somebody out of high school to do that, it takes at least a year before they're skilled enough to do that unsupervised. In a small business environment, we don't have the capital, we don't have the time to do that. So the kids coming out of schools aren't near ready to have jobs in our economy. Without more apprenticeship-type training, without more skills development, whether it's an issue with our community college vocational system, some people have told me it's parents encouraging four-year degrees when really the workforce skill gap is more talented. We need people to have apprenticeship-level training, and we need better kids come out of school that understand science and engineering, technology, all those things that go with STEM development. We need inspired kids that really want to work in this tech-savvy economy. And it's a national problem, but it's more acute here in Colorado. Is the data there? The data is there on the gaps and the business feedback all the time, but it is an acute problem. So I guess my point to all of us is helping promote education, helping promote science and technology development, inspiring our youth, because they are entering a very tech-savvy economy here in Colorado. And necessarily, if they don't have the aptitude or desire to get a four-year degree, there's a lot of opportunity in vocational capabilities, technical capabilities, to have a good paying job right here in Colorado. So, Brian, thanks a lot. Appreciate the talk. And yeah.
I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the group as well. During our conversation just before the event, I asked that you think about the amount of satellites and everything that are going into space, and who is monitoring that to know what is going up there, and are there any controls with regards to that? Would you answer that question?
Sure. Yeah. You want me to?
Sure. Can you come up here? That would be wonderful.
Okay. Good question. You know, space is getting to be a crowded environment, low Earth orbit. And today, known articles of debris just circling our Earth, 23,000 articles are being tracked daily on just things that are floating around in orbit around. And this is just the known debris. It's well over 100,000 estimated pieces of debris. Things could be as small as, you know, a fingernail orbiting Earth. But when it collides with a spacecraft at 17,000 miles an hour, it can cause a lot of damage. So who's responsible for that? Well, currently, the U.S. government funds the U.S. Air Force and tracks space situation awareness, tracks all these things in orbit today. It started off as a national security concern to monitor what's in orbit, to monitor our satellites plus other nations' satellites. And what are those things doing in orbit? We wanted to know exactly where they are, what they're doing. There's some other technologies I won't talk about, but the Air Force is tracking it. But the issue is they also become the clearinghouse. They become the clearinghouse to launch other satellites for launch vehicles into orbit. They have to have a debris-free, clear path to get into orbit and where it should be positioned. And the U.S. government provides that nation or that information to any other nation in the world, to include the Russians and Chinese, who may need this information for a successful launch. And obviously, with the U.S. having the majority of things in orbit, we want to make sure they don't launch and run into any of our things that are in orbit around the Earth.
You mentioned the amount of federal funding involved with space exploration specifically. It seems that there's a tension between the federal government funding and allowing the private sector to come in, which would hopefully drive down cost by having this thing called competition. Would you talk a little bit more about that in terms of more access for private companies, and what does that look like in working with the federal government?
Yeah. Our nation, in fact, in 2010 enacted the Space Act policy, which encouraged commercial development of space, not just a NASA-run program, NASA-run or a Department of Defense-run program funded, so the engineering was developed by NASA or a government, the program management was NASA or a government. It encouraged private sector and commercial sector development so that both Department of Defense, NASA, which are the big space agencies for our government, would outsource or pay for those services. And that was in 2010. And recently it's been updated in 2015 with its Space Act agreement. This has encouraged commercial development. In the U.S., it's an $80 billion space industry, and the government part of that was $55 billion. So you look at so it's still heavily government funded, but 10 years ago that would have been much more than that. So you see a rising commercial private sector development of space capability in our nation. It's enabled the SpaceX's, the Orbital ATKs, the Blue Origins, the Virgin Galactic. All those other businesses are looking at space as a commercial enterprise. And that's good for America. It's good for our nation. It's good for Colorado. SpaceX, direct competition for ULA, but CEO out here, Tori, will say that's good for our business, good for our company. And so it enables him to be more creative, more innovative. And I think because of this, you see technology today, instead of 10 years ago on a satellite that would fill up a third of this room in size, now technology's developed down into this, like I say, shoebox size. Now that's because of the innovation that really comes out of private sector development. And I'll tell you, for a long time, Air Force guy who ran big billion-dollar portfolios, the government is going to lead innovation technology development. True innovation comes out of private sector development, and the government just needs to, I think, step back, clear away the obstacles, enact policy, and let private sector run with it. Let the competitive pressures create innovation, technology development, and I think we see that today. And we see this growing commercial industry. It's great for our nation, great for Colorado.
Well said. Last question from me. So we may have some aspiring individuals in here who want to launch their own satellite into space. And what is the approximate cost to send a rocket into space and maybe put a satellite on it? What was the approximate cost of that?
Well, it does depend. Launch is all about weight. So you have a 2 million pound thrust rocket, but you measure all your payload in ounces. And that is, every ounce counts what's on that vehicle. So when you start looking at launch cost, there's a big difference, let's say a Delta IV Heavy with a $1 billion payload, let's say, and this could be an NRO type satellite system. But those things are going to cost a few $100 million, actually, to launch. Integrate the payload, do the launch, and successfully put the payload into the right trajectory, the right orbit. You can look at smaller payloads, smaller rockets. The workhorse of ULA is an Atlas V rocket. That's the workhorse for most of their launches. But it's still, and I'll say this budding industry in California, SpaceX, it's still looking at costs that's almost double what SpaceX is touting what their cost to launch is. And so when you're looking at and I'll just tell you, General Hyten, the commander of Air Force Space Command, recently I was at a forum, and he recently commented that we got to drive launch costs below $100 million based on their budget, the Air Force budget for launch, to still enable those critical payloads that we need to put in orbit with the budget pressure that we have. SpaceX is touting a $95 million launch cost, and I'll say ULA is almost double that, only because Tori Bruno, CEO, has told me we got to get our costs cut in half to be competitive. So the commercial sector is driving costs lower, which is good for our nation too.
I've always thought, can you imagine what an insurance policy looks like on a rocket? And the disclaimers. I'd love to know what the premiums are. So let's open it up for questions from everybody. Brian?
General, good to have you with us tonight. I think we might have been at the same event Saturday night.
Oh, yeah.
Were you at the gala?
Yes.
I was taken by Gene Kranz's comment when he was asked about the future of space, and he brought up Orion. Because he said, yeah, it'll get us out to deep space. He said, we don't have a landing vehicle. We can get to the moon, we can't land on it.
Right.
That stuff we did 45 years ago. Maybe you could take a couple of minutes to share your takeaways from Jim Lovell, Bud Hayes, and Gene Kranz.
So Brian's question is that they were the same event at Wings Over the Rockies,
Correct.
and share some of the comments that evening specifically about Orion and landing and those type of things.
Yeah, sure thing. Hey, tremendous event, and what we're talking about is Wings Over the Rockies Air and Space Museum. I happen to be on the board for the museum, so I was there, front row seat, and this was an annual gala, which is the biggest fundraiser we have for the museum, and the invite honorees this year were the Apollo 13 crew. Now, the three members of the crew, Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert, plus the flight director was Gene Kranz. Now, Jack Swigert passed away years ago from Colorado, actually, was elected to Congress here in Colorado, but he passed away due to a brain tumor 6 weeks after being elected and never served in office here in Colorado. So if you go through the terminal, I think it's Terminal B there in DIA, you see a statue that's of an astronaut. That's Jack Swigert on the statue. But we had them all up on stage, as we're talking about here, on some interview type questions. And they talked about going, their mission and going to the moon, and their disappointment due to the oxygen tank that exploded and they're never able to land on the moon. But they talked all about the teamwork and what that meant and how much they learned from that mission. And, they were that close to really, when you look at it, to a successful reentry and coming back to Earth. And to see the emotion, we're 40, this was 1970, and you look at 45 years later, and you could still feel the passion and emotion in their voices. So here we are today, and they talked about the Apollo program and how much pride and how much will we had as a nation and how it really galvanized this nation on the moon and the exploration, and where we are today, that we need the same spirit and we need to be a leader in the world. And there's so much to gain economically out of galvanizing an economy and an industry to set a goal, such as getting to Mars. But what we have today is the Orion space capsule, which is only the manned portion. And it needs yet to be developed a landing vehicle, which we don't have developed. So it's not going to land anywhere. It can go into space and orbit, but it can't land anywhere, get to anywhere. And we actually don't have the command support module, the system support module that needs to go and be the provided environmentals and flight support systems to enable this 7-month journey to Mars if we're ever going to get there. So all that is under development yet, but at least we've tested the Orion to its test to be integrated, launched, orbit, and return to Earth. Oh, by the way, at a high velocity re-entry, so a near maximum speed entry to Earth, and everything went fine with the Orion space capsule. So we need to get to Mars, I think, and set that as a goal.
Regardless of your political affiliation, involvement, or lack thereof, I've always said for years that, you think about what JFK did for our country and challenged us to get to the moon. And I really believe we need more metaphorical moons in society that I really do believe would galvanize society and help things like education, engineering, sciences, et cetera, to say, here's where we are, let's get there together. And that could be very, very powerful. I'd love to see more of our politicians take things like that on. With that?
Good to see you. Thank you.
So I'm going to try to repeat what you said. I know I'm going to get it wrong, but you'll give me grace, right? So there are two questions. One, we have 3 international trade zones in Colorado. What about doing some of the manufacturing in those? What would be the implications? And 2, how Internet 2 connecting? And I don't even know what that is, so I'm looking forward to hearing that answer. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of time that you've got a great answer for us. Yes.
Well,
Yeah. Wonderful.
yeah. Well, anything that'll enable our economy that makes sense. There's always when you talk about trade zones and enterprise zones and tax-free zones, exemption zones, it's always got to be balanced with the revenues that we forego in tax revenues and so forth. So I'll just say, coming from the governor's office in economic development, sure, if it's great for business, but it's also balanced about, we got to pay for, our education systems, our infrastructure development, we know we need to develop. So there's always a balance on this, on tax and revenues foregone. Yeah, are we creating more business development? Yes. But are we creating less money to fund education, which is sorely needed here in Colorado, and other infrastructure development? So it's a balance. And so I'm not going to really give an answer there. And I know that's wrestled about in the governor's office as well as in the legislature. Then we got this thing called Tabor. And I won't even go into that here in Colorado. Internet 2. You know more about Internet 2 than I do. But we're talking about a specialized capability through Internet 2, greater bandwidth and ability to talk to other agencies that normal universities and don't have the capability, and research institutions. There's some that do have the capability. I'm not a cyber expert. I'm not an Internet 2. I'm not on the dark net expert here. So I really don't know how to answer that, other than if we got specialized capabilities, we need to take a hard look at it, because it's all about this collaborative technology environment. If it enables collaboration and technology and innovation development, I think we need to promote it.
I want to be respectful to everybody's time, so let's take one last question. Yes?
You mentioned that all the GPS is run here out of Colorado Springs. Is there really no redundancy? The Russians rely on us. All bad guys in the Middle East. If we flip the switch, can we disable their military, basically?
The question is, he made the comment that Colorado is the GPS epicenter of the world, which is very good. It's a big statement to make. I'm sure that it's true. And if we were to flip a switch and shut it down, would it impact the entire world or not? Or could we even do that?
Well, first of all, there's other countries that have their own precision navigation and timing signals from space. Russians have the GLONASS system. It's fully operational, providing them capability. European Union has the Galileo system. And the French have another separate system, not part of the EU, but their own government system. Now, I was recently giving welcoming remarks to an international committee of global navigation system. This committee was a world body, was meeting at the University Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. Governor couldn't make it, so I'm giving the welcoming remarks on behalf of the governor for Colorado. And sitting right in front of me was a whole line of the Russian delegation, Chinese delegation, Indian delegation, very interested and in fact, when the Russian delegation got up there, the first thing they said is, "We're very jealous of GPS. You have 39 satellites in orbit, and we have 8 or 9 or something like that." But the U.S. capability is phenomenal of what we do, and most of the world relies on the GPS system that we provide free to the world as a government. Now, so other countries have their systems. The Chinese also have a system in development. Is there backup capability? Yes. I'll just leave it at that.
Let's thank our speaker tonight.
No, thank you.
So, again, thank you all for coming tonight. Hope you found it informational. I could ask him a million questions. We have one more event for this year, December 10th. We have Tim Jackson, my friend who's president and CEO of the Colorado Auto Dealers Association. And so feel free to come to that one. During the December event, we take, you paid $20 to get into here. Hopefully you did. Half of that cost usually goes to food. The other half we go and we give to a deserving nonprofit in the community that's making a positive impact. During the month of December, we give 100% of that away. And so we'll be identifying a good charity to give to, and if you want to bring other things to that, then feel free to do so. But it's a good time of year to try to bring a smile to someone's face and help them out a little way, in some way. Again, thank you all for being here tonight.